I took the night shift at an abandoned hospital because I needed the money. That is the simple version. The truth is, I had already been unemployed for almost 2 months. My savings were disappearing, and I was becoming desperate enough to accept almost any job that didn't require a clean office, a college degree, or pretending to enjoy talking to people. The hospital had been closed for years. It was supposed to be demolished. Instead, the property changed ownership, the demolition kept getting delayed, and the new owner needed someone to watch the building overnight. The job listing described it as private security, 8 hours a night, 5 nights a week. Mostly walking the building, checking doors, monitoring cameras, and making sure nobody got inside. The pay was almost twice what I had been making before, so I took it. The first thing the security manager told me was strange. He said, "Whatever you hear in there, don't assume it's a person." I laughed because I thought he was joking. He wasn't. The hospital was called St. Vincent's. It had been a functioning hospital for almost 70 years before it finally closed. From the outside, it looked like something that had been abandoned in a hurry. The main building was 6 stories tall, with long rows of dark windows and an entrance covered by plywood. There was an older emergency wing connected to the back. That part of the building was mostly sealed. According to my manager, nobody was supposed to go inside the emergency wing, not even security. My first shift started at 10:00 p.m. The daytime security guard showed me around before leaving. The building was much larger than I expected. There were long corridors, abandoned patient rooms, nurses' stations, operating rooms, storage areas, stairwells, and entire sections that hadn't been touched in years. Most of the electricity had been shut off. The only lights that worked were emergency lights and a few motion-activated fixtures connected to the security system. The hospital smelled like dust, old disinfectant, and something faintly metallic. My manager gave me a flashlight, a radio, a set of keys, and a checklist. Every hour I had to walk a predetermined route. I also had to check the basement. That was the part I didn't like. The basement contained the old maintenance rooms and the hospital morgue. The morgue hadn't been used since the hospital closed. The manager noticed me looking at the basement key. "You don't need to go into the morgue," he said. "Then why is it on the checklist?" He paused. "Because the door needs to stay locked." That answer bothered me, but I didn't ask anything else. My first few hours were completely uneventful. At midnight, I walked the 3rd floor. At 1 in the morning, I checked the 2nd floor. At 2, I went downstairs. The hospital was incredibly quiet, not normal quiet, the kind of quiet where every little sound becomes noticeable. My shoes against the tile, the hum of the ventilation system, the occasional clicking noise from an old pipe. At 2:17 a.m. I was walking past the nurse's station on the 4th floor when I heard something. A telephone ringing. I stopped. It rang again. A classic hospital telephone, 3 short rings, then silence. I looked toward the nurse's station. There was an old desk phone sitting there. I walked over and stared at it. The phone was unplugged. The cable had been cut. I actually checked it twice. There was no way it could have been ringing. I wrote it down on my security report. I assumed it was some electrical malfunction. Then I heard it again. This time it came from farther down the hallway. I followed the sound. It stopped before I reached it. I stood there listening. Nothing. I turned around and walked back toward the stairs. Halfway there, the telephone rang behind me. I froze. I didn't turn around immediately. The sound came from the nurse's station. 3 rings, then silence. I went back. The phone was still sitting there, still unplugged. I decided not to investigate further. I finished my shift at 6:00 a.m. and went home. The next night I asked my manager about it. He didn't seem surprised. "Old wiring," he said, "but the phone was unplugged. Old building." That was his entire explanation. I almost quit, but I needed the money, so I went back that night. And the second night was when things became worse. At around 1:30 a.m. I was checking the 5th floor when I heard footsteps. They were coming from the floor above me. The sixth floor, I stopped. The sixth floor was supposed to be completely empty. Nobody was allowed up there. I radioed my manager. No answer. I tried again, still nothing. I thought maybe the radio had lost signal, so I climbed the stairs. The sixth floor was darker than the rest of the building. There were no working lights. I switched on my flashlight. The beam illuminated a long corridor lined with patient rooms. Most of the doors were open. Some had fallen off their hinges. At the end of the hallway was a red exit sign. I stood there listening, nothing. Then I heard the footsteps again, slow, heavy, coming from somewhere behind me. I turned around. The hallway was empty. The footsteps stopped. I waited. Then I heard one more step, directly behind me. I spun around so quickly that my flashlight nearly flew out of my hand. Nothing. I told myself it was the building settling. Old structures make noises, pipes move, metal contracts, doors shift. There were explanations for everything. I walked toward the end of the hallway. That's when I noticed something strange. One of the patient room doors was closed. Every other door on that floor was open. Room 612. I checked my keys. The door wasn't listed on my route. I wasn't supposed to enter it. So I kept walking. When I reached the stairwell, I heard the door behind me open. Slowly, I turned around. Room 612 was open. I could see darkness inside. I stood there for several seconds. Then I heard something from inside, a voice, very quiet. Help, I didn't move. The voice came again, please. It sounded like a woman. I immediately reached for my radio. Control, this is security. Static, I tried again, nothing. I walked toward the room. Every instinct I had told me not to, but this was an abandoned hospital. If someone had actually gotten inside, they could have been injured. I stood outside room 612. Hello, no response. I pushed the door open. My flashlight moved across an empty patient room. An old bed, a broken cabinet, a wheelchair, dust everywhere, nobody was there. Then I noticed the television. It was sitting on a shelf in the corner. It was an old box television. It wasn't connected to anything, but the screen was glowing. Snowy static filled the display. I stared at it. The television suddenly changed. For less than a second, I saw an image, a hospital corridor. It looked like the hallway I was standing in, but it wasn't empty. There were people walking through it, doctors, nurses, patients. The image disappeared. The television went black. I backed out of the room. I didn't even bother closing the door. I went directly downstairs. When I reached the security office, I checked the cameras. There were 12 camera feeds. The 6th floor cameras were supposed to be offline, but one of them was showing an image. I clicked on it. It was the hallway outside room 612. Empty. I watched for almost a minute, then something moved at the far end. A person stepped into view. They were wearing what looked like hospital scrubs. They stood perfectly still. I leaned closer to the monitor. The figure slowly turned toward the camera. Then the feed went black. I immediately grabbed my radio. Control, did you see that? This time someone answered. It was my manager. His voice sounded different. Leave the 6th floor. I stared at the radio. What? Don't go back up there. I asked him why. There was a long silence. Then he said, because nobody is supposed to be on the 6th floor. I told him about room 612. He didn't answer. I told him about the television. Still nothing. Finally, he said something that made my stomach drop. Room 612 was removed from the hospital records. I looked toward the security monitors. What does that mean? It means there is no room 612. I thought he was messing with me. So I grabbed the building floor plan from the desk. I unfolded it. The 6th floor had rooms 601 through 611. Then the hallway ended. There was no 612. I looked back at the camera. The feed was still black. I zoomed in on the floor plan. The wall between room 611 and the stairwell was supposed to be solid. But when I looked at the 6th floor camera again, I could clearly remember seeing a door where the wall should have been. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the security office until sunrise. At 5:43 a.m., something happened that convinced me I couldn't ignore the hospital anymore. The security system suddenly detected motion on the 6th floor. One camera activated, then another, then another. The motion was moving down the hallway toward the stairs. I watched the monitors one by one. Nothing appeared, but the motion sensors kept triggering. Floor 6, floor 5, floor 4, whatever was triggering them was moving downward. Then the sensor on the 3rd floor activated. I stood up. My hand went to the flashlight. The security office door was directly behind me. And from the hallway outside, I heard footsteps, slow, heavy, coming toward the door. Then the footsteps stopped. 3 seconds passed and someone knocked once, twice. Then a 3rd time. I didn't open the door. The knocking stopped. I waited. Nothing. Then my radio crackled. My manager's voice came through. He whispered, "Don't let it know you're in there." I stared at the radio. Before I could answer, the security office door handle slowly began to turn. And that's when I realized something. My manager wasn't supposed to be inside the hospital. He wasn't even scheduled to arrive until 8 in the morning. The door handle kept turning, slowly, once to the left, then back to the right. I stood behind the desk staring at it. I didn't breathe, I didn't move. Then the handle stopped. For several seconds, nothing happened. I thought whoever was outside had left. Then 3 soft knocks came from the other side. Exactly 3. The same knocks I had heard before. I reached for my phone, no signal. I checked the security monitors. Every camera was showing the same thing, an empty hallway. But the motion sensors were still detecting something directly outside my door. I grabbed my radio. "Who is this?" Static. Then my manager answered, "Stay inside." I looked at the radio. His voice was unmistakable. "Where are you?" Silence. Then he said, "6th floor." My stomach dropped. I looked at the clock. 5:47 a.m. "You're not supposed to be here." There was a long pause, then he whispered, "I know." The radio went dead. I didn't know what to do. Every logical part of my brain was telling me to leave. But the security office had only one exit, the door behind me, and something was standing outside it. I grabbed the emergency flashlight and backed away from the door. Then I heard footsteps moving away. One step, then another, then another. They disappeared down the hallway. I waited nearly a minute before checking the camera. The hallway was empty. I opened the door, nothing. I stepped into the hallway. The motion detector immediately activated, but there was nobody there. I walked toward the main entrance. I wasn't finishing the shift. I wasn't checking anything else. I was leaving. When I reached the lobby, I noticed something that made me stop. The front doors were locked. I tried my key. Nothing. I tried again. Nothing. The electronic lock wasn't responding. Then I noticed the security monitor beside the entrance. It showed the front parking lot. My car was sitting outside, and someone was standing beside it. A tall person wearing dark clothing. I grabbed the radio. "Who is outside?" No answer. I zoomed the camera in. The person turned toward the camera. I couldn't see their face, but they raised one hand and pointed directly toward the hospital. Then the camera feed went black. I stepped away from the monitor. That's when the emergency lights came on. Every light in the lobby turned red. Then I heard something from the hallway behind me, a hospital intercom. It crackled to life. "Code blue." I froze. The announcement repeated. "Code blue." Then another announcement. "Room 612. I looked toward the corridor. There was no room 612. At least there wasn't supposed to be. But now I could see a door at the end of the hallway. A door that hadn't been there before. It had a small metal number attached to it. 612. I stood there staring at it. The door slowly opened. No one was behind it, just darkness. Then I heard the telephone ringing 3 times. I knew exactly where it was coming from. The nurse's station. I walked toward it. I didn't want to, but I needed to understand what was happening. The old telephone was ringing. I picked it up. For a few seconds there was nothing. Then I heard breathing, a woman's breathing, slow, weak. I said, "Who is this?" She whispered, "Are you security?" "Yes." Her voice became quieter. "Then you need to get out." I looked toward room 612. "Who are you?" She didn't answer. Instead, she said something that I still remember word for word. "They told us someone would come back." I felt my stomach tighten. "Who told you?" There was silence. Then she whispered, "The man who watches the cameras." The line went dead. I immediately dropped the phone. I ran back toward the security office, but when I reached the hallway, I stopped. The security office door was open. I knew I had closed it. Inside, the monitors were all showing the same image, room 612, and this time the camera wasn't pointed at the hallway. It was pointed inside the room. I could see the old hospital bed, the wheelchair, the television. And on the wall behind the bed was something I hadn't noticed before. Names, dozens of names, written directly onto the wall. Some were dates, some were patient numbers. And at the very bottom was a name I recognized, my manager's. I walked closer to the monitor. His name had a date beside it. The date was 6 years earlier. I stared at it. Then I remembered something. The manager had told me the hospital had been closed for 6 years. I suddenly understood why his reaction to room 612 had been so strange. He knew about it. He had known the entire time. I grabbed the keys and ran for the basement. I didn't know why. Maybe because I remembered something he had told me on my first night. The basement, the morgue, the locked door. I found the basement entrance and hurried down the stairs. The air became colder as I descended. The corridor was almost completely dark. I reached the morgue. The door was still locked. I tried the key. It opened. Inside were empty stainless steel tables, old cabinets, broken equipment. Everything was covered in dust, except one thing, a small file box sitting on the floor. It looked brand new. I opened it. Inside were patient records. I started flipping through them. The names matched the ones I had seen on the wall. Then I found a report dated 6 years earlier. It described a night when several patients had been evacuated from the 6th floor because of an electrical fire. But according to the report, one patient was never found. A woman, room 612. I kept reading. The final line said, "Patient presumed deceased, body never recovered." I stared at the paper. Then something moved behind me. I turned around. Nobody. I grabbed the file and ran. As I reached the basement stairs, my radio came alive. My manager's voice whispered, "You found it." I stopped. "Where are you?" He didn't answer. Instead, he said, "You need to leave before 6. I looked at my watch. 5:56 a.m. Why? He finally answered, "Because that's when they start the rounds." I didn't understand what he meant. Then I heard footsteps above me, multiple footsteps. Not one person, several, slowly walking across the floor above. I ran upstairs. The hospital was completely silent. Then I heard wheels rolling, a hospital gurney, coming from the 6th floor. I sprinted toward the emergency exit. The alarm sounded when I pushed the door open. I ran outside. My car was still there. I unlocked it, jumped inside, and started the engine. I didn't look back. I drove straight to the security company's office. The manager wasn't there. I waited 10 minutes, 20. Finally, another employee arrived. I asked him where the manager was. He looked confused. "What manager?" I told him his name. The employee stared at me, then he slowly shook his head. "That guy hasn't worked here in years." I thought he was joking. He wasn't. I pulled out the file I had taken from the hospital. I showed him the name. His face changed. He told me to wait. Then he went into the back office. A few minutes later, he returned with an old photograph. It was a group photo of the security staff. I recognized my manager immediately. Same face, same clothes. Same man I had been speaking to on the radio. But there was one problem. The photograph was dated 7 years earlier, and underneath his name was a handwritten note, "Deceased." I quit that morning. I never went back to St. Vincent's. A few days later, I contacted the property owner and told him everything. He didn't seem surprised. He only asked me one question. "Did you go into room 612? I told him no. That wasn't completely true. I had seen it, but I hadn't stepped inside. He seemed relieved. Then he told me something I still think about. There had never been a room 612, not officially. The 6th floor had always ended at room 611. But during the hospital's final year, several employees reported hearing a telephone ringing from a room that didn't exist. The hospital investigated. They found nothing. Then the report stopped. Until the night I started working there. I asked him about the woman on the phone. He didn't know what I was talking about. I asked about the patient who disappeared. He told me there had been no missing patient. According to the hospital's official records, everyone had been evacuated successfully during the fire. Nobody died, nobody disappeared, but I still had the file. I kept it. For months I couldn't bring myself to open it again. Eventually I did. There was one page I had missed. It was the last page in the file. There was no patient information on it, just a security report. The report was written 6 years ago. At the bottom was a sentence. Night security employee reported seeing an unknown man monitoring the 6th floor cameras. I stared at it. Because the description of the man matched my manager, and underneath that sentence was another line. Employee disappeared before morning shift arrived. I never found out what happened to him. The hospital was demolished several months later. The entire building was torn down. The 6th floor, the basement, everything. I thought that would finally put an end to it. Then almost a year later, I received an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single photograph. It showed the old hospital taken from across the parking lot. The building was already partially demolished. But one section of the 6th floor was still standing, and behind one window, there was a person. I couldn't see the face, but I knew exactly which window it was. Room 612. On the back of the photograph, someone had written 4 words, "You left too early." I never found out who sent it, and I still don't know what was actually happening inside that hospital. Maybe there was someone living in the building. Maybe the security company knew more than they admitted. Maybe the room existed and was deliberately removed from the blueprints. Or maybe exhaustion, darkness, and an abandoned hospital convinced me that I was seeing things that weren't there. There is one detail, though, that I have never been able to explain. The photograph was taken after the hospital had been partially demolished, and the window where I saw that person. It was on the 6th floor, the same floor that supposedly never had a room 612. So what was that person standing inside? I don't know, and honestly I don't think I ever want to find out. That was the end of this story. If you've ever experienced something you still can't explain or have a strange story of your own, send it to Tales of the Dark. Your story could become the next nightmare featured on this channel. If you are new here, subscribe to Tales of the Dark, where every story gives you a nightmare.